I'm sure by now you've seen videos on YouTube about what is the best 10-man raid comp or what is the best 25-man raid comp in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. Today we're going to talk about the best 10-man raid comp, and I want to put it out there straight away that I've took a lot of different things into consideration here, such as loot distribution. So we're not just going to have 5 or 6 people all roll in on the same tier token. Not only that, you're probably expecting me to say Holy Disc Priest as the healers in every group and Protection Paladin and Death Knight as the tank in every group. You would be wrong. On top of the obvious like loot distribution and actually having a decent setup, we are also thinking about maximizing the amount of buffs we get for either a physical damage dealing group or a caster heavy group. By no means are these the max top DPS comps or the fastest speed running comps. These are just a balanced composition for you to think about using in your guild in tier 7, and I say tier 7 specifically because come tier 8 these would all change. So let's have a look. Like and subscribe. So first of all, we'll look at a very caster orientated group. So first of all, yes, we are going to want a Protection Paladin, and like I said, it's not just going to be Paladin and DK, but in each group we will use a Paladin, and the reason for that is things like Divine Sacrifice. You just can't pass up a 20% damage reduction across your entire raid, and the extra blessing, and amazing single target and AoE threat. Hands such as Hand of Salvation, Hand of Sacrifice, they just bring so much that they almost are mandatory in a 10 and a 25-man raid group. So now we've got our main tank, let's focus on our DPS. So first of all, we're going to want a Shadow Priest. Now there's a couple of reasons why the Shadow Priest is going to be important. We're going to get things such as replenishment, but we are also going to get Power Word Fortitude. Now instantly you're thinking, well, what about the 3% hit that we're going to get from Misery? The only reason I've not mentioned that is because we are actually going to have a Balanced Druid as well. So the Balanced Druid is going to be bringing 3% haste, 13% spell damage taken, as well as the obvious ones like Gift of the Wild. Now both Balance and Shadow can both put out really good single target damage, and their AoE is very good. Obviously, Boomy AoE in tier 7 specifically being extremely high, but a Shadow Priest can hold their own. Now, we're also going to want a Demonology Warlock, and we're going to want an Arcane Mage. Now, Arcane just does incredible damage. It also brings the 3% damage buff for everyone, which is going to be a must-have. And you're going to get Intellect, obviously, which is going to be very important. And the Demonology Warlock, assuming he's actually got a decent amount of gear, will bring a good amount of spell power, more spell power than Totem of Wrath. It is worth noting, you could drop an Elemental Shaman in here because Totem of Wrath does actually increase the amount of spell power your raid's going to get from Demonic Pact. This raid comp isn't going to include an Elemental Shaman, and as we get through, you'll understand why. Now, it would be absolutely fine to now chuck in any other ranged you want, but we are going to want to balance it a little bit, and I will always balance these raid comps. We're not just going to go with 2 tanks, 2 healers, and 6 ranged DPS, because some fights will require either interrupts or some melee. So melee-wise, I find what are going to complement each other very well is going to be Combat Rogue, and you're all instantly like, no, everyone's going to play Assassination. Yeah, the majority of rogues will play Assassination, but this will make sense in a second. So from the Combat Rogue, you're going to get 4% physical damage, which is not a physical heavy group, but it is going to be a balanced group based around casters, and that'll make more sense in a minute. So you're going to get the 4% physical damage taken. We are going to then be able to get Expose Armor and Tricks of the Trade for initial threat for your tank, and then 15% damage on whoever you want from there on out is going to be very important. Now, to help the Combat Rogue out, we're going to put an Enhancement Shaman in. Now, Enhancement's pretty much going to cover all of the physical buffs that we're going to need for the rogue, so the rogue isn't felt completely left behind. And you'll see straight away, we've covered almost all buffs, and we've still got 3 slots. Now, the 5% physical crit is going to be made up by our Feral Bear. So our off-tank is going to be a Feral Bear with dual spec, who's going to go Feral Cat when it's a single tank fight. This means the 5% crit for the Rogue and the Shaman is going to be there. The Protection Paladin is going to solo tank most fights. There's only the odd fight, such as Thaddeus, the first 2 ads on Thaddeus, where you'd do it in cat form anyway, as in you'd be your cat spec, but you'd just tank the first ad in bear form. Patchwork, you're going to need your Feral to tank. You know, we're talking specifically tier 7 here, but, you know, going in, Malagos is only going to have 1 tank. Sarfarian, depending on how you do it, you could do it with only 1 tank. And the majority of Nax you can do with 1 tank. So the Feral is going to be cat most of the time, meaning the Feral is going to be pumping, so is the Enhancement Shaman, and they're getting that physical damage taken debuff from the Rogue, as well as the 20% armor debuff. So actually, even though this is a caster-heavy group, your physical damage dealers are still going to be getting basically everything they need and doing very good damage. Now, this is where you're like, go on then, Scott, put in the Disc Priest. No. To this group, I would then put a Resto Shaman. And the reason I would put a Resto Shaman in is because what we was missing at the moment was 5% spell haste. It was saying we had 5% spell haste, because we've got the Shaman there. But the 20% melee haste we're going to need from the Enhancement Shaman for our Feral and our Rogue. So the Resto Shaman is going to be bringing the 5% spell haste for Group 2, as well as obviously a bunch of other things like being able to Mana Tide, which is going to give, all of the casters some mana back if the fights are taking a bit long. But with this sort of comp, the fights ain't going to take long. All of these are pumpers, which single target and AoE, Shadow is very strong. It's stronger on single target. Balance is very strong on AoE and single target. Demonology is very strong on AoE and single target, and is going to bring that big spell power buff to all of them, which is also, remember, going to benefit the Enhancement Shaman as well. As is the Balanced Druid's 13% spell damage taken that he's going to be keeping up is going to benefit the Enhancement Shaman as well, and obviously the Protection Paladin for threat. We all know Arcane Mage is super strong on single target. Ideally, you would want your Arcane Mage here to also have a Frost off spec, and the reason you'd want him to have a Frost off spec is actually specifically just for one boss, which is Gluth. Now, Gluth, if you don't know, in Nax, will need some ads kiting around, basically. Ordinarily, a Hunter or a Frost Mage's job. You haven't got a Hunter in this group, so it's going to come down to your Mage. The Mage may be able to do it with slowing totems from the Shamans, and obviously just running around, kiting around the totems, but if he's got a Frost off spec, that would be perfect. And you've been waiting, and the final slot is obviously going to go to our Holy Paladin. That's so we get our second blessing. We've now got 2 Divine Sacrifice, or Divine Guardian, if you want to call it Divine Guardian, and we've covered almost every buff in a 10-man raid group while keeping Heroism still or Bloodlust. We have Replenishment, which is going to be important. We've got Kiters in off-spec for certain fights. We can one tank, and we can even one heal. So there's going to be many times in Nax where you don't need a second healer. The healer will be, the Holy Paladin will be able to manage the healing for the majority of it on its own. So you've now got that Resto Shaman that can actually switch to Elemental and is going to benefit from all of the buffs that we're getting for the other casters. You could say, well, you'd have the option of the Holy Paladin going Ret, but you don't really want the Holy Paladin to go Ret. The biggest benefit here, especially in Tier 7, when Elemental Shamans are very strong, letting the Prot Paladin solo tank and the Holy Paladin solo heal, you're going to get the big damage from the Feral and the big damage from the Elemental Shaman, who's being buffed massively with this group comp. Like I said, there are changes you could make, but this would be my optimal caster orientated while still maintaining some balance 10-man comp. I will say tier token wise here, this group isn't as balanced as I would like. It's got 4, 4 and 2 that roll on the tokens. Paladin, Priest, Warlock running on 1 token, which you've got 4 of them. You've got Warrior, Hunter, Shaman rolling on it, which we've only got the 2 Shamans. And then Rogue, Death Knight, Mage, Druid is the other token where we've got 4. So it's 4, 4, 2, where I would like 4, 3, 3. You could swap anything out other than the Shamans, the tanks and the healers to maybe get a Survival Hunter in to balance the loot distribution a little bit more. But honestly, this would be the 10-man comp I took. Now let's clear all that and look at what I would consider a really good physical damage dealing group. So like I said at the start, we are still going to have our Protection Paladin, but this is the bit that's going to shock you. So we're going to have a Warrior off tank. Everyone says Warriors are really bad. Not in this comp. So we're putting him in as arms because he is only going to need to go protection for a couple of individual bosses. And we aren't going to have a Holy Paladin at all. Now remember, this is only tier 7, and I did say in tier 8 this would change completely, but this is going to be a very controversial physical damage dealing group, and I'm going to explain why. We're going to have our Disc Priest healing, which is going to bring Rapture. So when Power Word Shield is completely absorbed or dispelled, the player has a 100% chance to become energized with 2% mana, 8 rage, 16 energy, or 32 runic power, and this can only occur every 12 seconds. And we're also going to use a Resto Druid. So we're going to have Discipline and Resto. So the raid-wide healing is going to be amazing, and both will have to just focus a little bit on the tanks. But now we've got Revitalize as well. So your Rejuve and Wild Growth spells have a 15% chance to restore 8 energy, 4 rage, 1% mana, or 16 runic power per tick. This is a physical damage dealing group. We're probably going to have someone using runic power, rage, energy. So it makes sense to maximize their DPS, but also take 2 healers, because ultimately, not really going to matter. Any 2 healing combination will be able to heal all of tier 7. So, just whatever. So, in here with them, we're going to put an Assassination Rogue. Now, Assassination, yes, it will suffer on cleave, but its single target is going to dominate, probably, in this group. And then, of course, with a physical damage dealing group, we're going to put an Enhancement Shaman in, because you watch all of these buffs just fill up very, very quickly just from taking the Enhancement Shaman. They bring the most strength and agility in terms of Strength of Earth Totem. You're going to get your 10% attack power from Unleash Rage. You're going to get your 20% melee haste from Wind Fury Totem. You're going to bring Hero. You get what I mean. Enhancement Shaman going in there is just going to bring so much. We're going to put a Survival in because he's going to bring Replenishment. Not only that, Survival does really, really good damage and is still classed as physical damage dealing. We all know Feral DPS, if he's a good Feral, is going to bring a lot. You're going to get the 5% crit. You're going to get tons and tons of damage. And it's got pretty much all the buffs it wants. just from the Enhancement Shaman. Now, Frost or Unholy here isn't going to matter. We are going to want to DK. I'd take the Unholy for the 13% spell damage taken, because even though this is a physical damage dealing group, buffing that Enhancement Shaman and even the threat from the Paladin is going to be really nice, and the difference between Unholy and Frost DPS is generally not that big. In fact, dual wield Unholy looks like quite a popular spec at the moment, even though it's not something we see too often on private servers. Now, we've got one spot left and we've only got one blessing, so we are going to take a Retribution Paladin. They're not going to bring the most single target DPS, but their AoE and cleave is going to be great for trash and for any fights that's got multiple targets. But also, they're going to bring the 3% haste and the 3% damage. So bringing a Ret Paladin who's going to buff the entire group with 3% damage and 3% haste is absolutely worth it. And if we look at what we're missing, all we haven't got is intellect, spell crit, spell hit, and then the other spell crit. So we're missing some spell-related stuff, but our only ranged is going to be a survival hunter anyway. And if we needed an extra range for any particular fight, the Feral, if he's like me, is going to have Boomy off spec. I'm going Feral Cat Boomy. If it's a melee unfriendly fight, I'll switch to Boomy, because all I'm interested in is DPSing. So if you've got that option, maybe that's the way you go. But such as fights like Gloof, you've now got your Survival Hunter to kite all the ads. You have got the flexibility here. If your DK is Blood, you may want your Unholy to actually spec tank for different fights. Now your Feral is going to get a Hysteria as well. Your Retribution can bring a second Divine Guardian for a 20% reduced damage over 6 seconds for the entire raid. It's not the standard raiding spec, but a Ret can bring it and not really lose too much damage themselves. And overall, this would be a super strong comp. Enhancement, Survival, Retribution, all going to absolutely pump on AoE, and even Arms will, of course. Your DK as Unholy, when your Paladin is just tanking all the trash himself, and even the Feral with swiping. The trash and any AoE bosses which can be solo tanked is just going to fall over. And you've got everything that's going to buff your physical damage dealers, and you've got that Assassination Rogue that is going to be a big, big single target pumper, along with your Survival, your Enhancement, your Feral, and your Unholy. Like, literally, it is just a really, really high DPS group. The only place I could say this would fall down is anywhere where you do need a lot more ranged. But as I say, in tier 7, you don't. This group would just destroy anything. So they're my 2 raid comps for 10 man that I would recommend. I'd be happy taking both of these raid comps. Let me know what you think about them in the comments below. Would you change anything? Who would you drop out? Who would you take in? Bearing in mind what buffs you're going to lose, what buffs you're going to gain. Don't just go, oh, we want more rogues because we like rogues. You know, what is everybody else going to lose by putting that rogue in? The 25-man one's going to be a lot more flexible, as you'll see when that comes out in the next couple of days. So like and subscribe so you don't miss that. But yeah, smash that like button. Don't cost anything, does it? And I'll see you on the next one. Roll the outro. There's lots of ways you can support the channel to keep me here putting out World of Warcraft content and covering all future MMOs. Consider joining the channel as a member. You get access to emotes. Everyone will know you're a member when you comment on future videos because you get a nice icon next to your name. And you get access to members-only videos, which I'll be putting a lot of on the channel throughout the year. Additionally, there's a Patreon link in the description as well. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you on the next one.